This is Hurricane HQ, the Cone of Confusion. Join us as we dissect the upcoming hurricane season. We're joined by the director of the National Hurricane Center, Dr. Michael Brennan, along with warning coordination meteorologist Robbie Berg, as they prepare for the Atlantic hurricane season. Fox Weather's Robert Ray tells us how he's preparing to step into the storm and why he faces a hurricane's fury head on. Brandy Campbell goes storm hunting with the men and women who risk it all to help save lives during hurricane season. And the lightning round. We take your toughest questions right to the source. Category 6, any value at all? Hey, I'm Fox Weather's Ian Oliver, and welcome to Miami, the Magic City. Big Willie Styles said it best. This is the city where the heat is on, and boy is that the case through the early part of the hurricane season. In this region, which is dominated by tropical weather for more than half the year, the threat of hurricanes looms large. That's why we're here at the National Hurricane Center, where some of NOAA's top scientists put together the most important forecast of the season. And of course, we're joined by Fox Weather's hurricane specialist, Bryan Norcross. Bryan, we're getting ready to roll for what we think is going to be a busy season.
Yeah, but we also remember the National Hurricane Center is here and is built the way it is, like a bunker, because of Hurricane Andrew.
This place is a straight up fortress, it is.
It absolutely is. And Hurricane Andrew happened in a very quiet hurricane season. So it's not about the numbers of storms, it's about where they hit. But there's still a lot of warm water and a lot to talk about for this hurricane season.
The forecast cone. It's a graphic that you're probably very familiar with at home, especially if you live in the hurricane zone. It represents the probable track of the center of a tropical system. 2/3 of the time, that center stays within the cone. It's also likely the most misunderstood hurricane season forecast graphic. It doesn't tell the whole story of the storm. All right, we're here inside the operations area at the National Hurricane Center with Director Dr. Michael Brennan and Warning Coordination Meteorologist Robbie Berg. Great to have you both with us.
Thanks.
There have been questions for years about the cone, but it truly came to a head with Hurricane Ian. A lot of new Floridians that moved down during the pandemic. Wasn't a bad forecast. The center of the cone, on the center of the storm on the right side of the cone, yep. Storm surge watches, those were out 2.5 days out. But for some reason, there was a disconnect. The hazards, the message of those just didn't make it to people and even some emergency officials. Did that become especially apparent immediately after Ian?
Well, I think we try to learn lessons from every storm, and you try to look at the response. And it's important to remember that everybody's evacuation decision is pretty individualized and pretty personalized. There are some unique challenges in parts of Lee County in particular in terms of demographics and mobility. And we look at the ages of people who died in the storm surge, largely elderly portion of the population has difficulty moving. But yeah, we have tried to, reinforce that the cone is only just one piece of the information we provide about tropical storms and hurricanes. And it's sort of like the cover of your book. It's a high-level overview of where the center of the storm might go, but again, it doesn't really get into that hazard space. And like you said, we have storm surge watches and warnings to highlight the risk of that life-threatening inundation, which is what drives most evacuation decisions. So we're really trying to steer people towards that. But the cone is pretty institutionalized. It's been around for more than 20 years. We're not just going to be able to flip a switch and turn it off, but we have to undertake that continual education effort to make people realize what it is and what it isn't.
Robbie, was it a surprise that this storm was so much a surprise for many, being that the storm surge watch was out 2.5 days out, that got upgraded to a warning, it just didn't seem to connect?
Yeah, I think what it told us is that we have to do a better job when we can to try and get that message out that yes, we're going to see the cone, we use the cone, but steer the message toward what's most important. As Mike said, the watches and warnings that were in effect, the storm surge forecasts themselves that were in effect, and getting people to focus on that instead of just the cone itself.
So some changes are coming later this season. The inland watches and warnings will be overlaid on top of the cone. Again, that's more so when we get into August. Bryan, you and I were talking about this. If you're doing it right, you've already been de-emphasizing the cone and emphasizing the hazards, but that is something, that effort is really going to have to ramp up.
Yeah, one of the big challenges is that the cone works so well on your phone. And so many people in those days leading up to the storm, not the event when it's happening, then people largely are watching television in some fashion, some sort of continuous source of information. But before that, a lot of people get their information from their phone, and the cone works better than watches and warnings on the phone to a significant degree, except that more and more alerts are going to be the way that people get their watches and warnings. But the thing is, the alert comes and goes. The phone you can look at every time easily, over and over again.
I think we need to be especially mindful of that too, because we're guilty of saying, hey, we get the new cone coming out at 11 a.m. or 5 p.m.
Right.
It's a whole story every time. So as we ramp up this de-emphasize the cone initiative and emphasize the hazards, does the new steps, do they do enough? Some will say, the problem with Ian was, of course, the storm surge. The storm surge watches and warnings aren't on the new product, but you can't put everything on the new product. So how did you decide what to add and what not to add?
Yeah, the storm surge warning is such fine scale, it doesn't really lend itself to sort of a big picture product like the cone. But I think it goes back to an important point. There's so much emphasis on the cone because 20 years ago, we could really only tell people about a track forecast or what the category was. We couldn't get into the hazard space. But now we have so much more information that we can provide to people. We sort of have to train them and wean them off of this sort of mentality that the only thing that they have to pay attention to is a track or intensity forecast or the category. So it's going to take time, but I think we are getting there, and we have new products now that we've introduced over the last few years that really do get at the water hazards, the surge, and then the rainfall flooding that are responsible for the vast majority of the fatalities that we see.
Robbie, we got a chance to talk at the National Hurricane Conference, and a lot of the interesting content there was from social science. The University of Miami did this study that it was something like a little bit less than 20% of all people actually have a good understanding of what the cone is. How much did some of that social science play into the decision to make these tweaks?
Yeah, I think it was key. I mean, on one hand, we don't want to make a full-scale change. Like Mike said, the cone is institutionalized. If we either flip the switch or make drastic changes over a year, that's probably not going to go very well. So with some of the social science we've looked at and worked with the researchers on, it's how can we make gradual shifts and changes to the product that's going to satisfy those needs while also allowing society to adapt as it changes.
Bryan, you've been at the forefront of this throughout your entire career. You talked about the debut of the cone itself and a life telling the message with and without it. What are your thoughts moving forward here?
Well, like I said, to me, the phone is the answer to the communications conduit, and getting all this information in a way that it fits the way people get information now is, to me, critically important. All the other things that we do to make all communications better is better. But as Mike said, there is so much more information now. Figuring out how to get this large volume of good information into people's phones, into their hands, is really the answer, because the more information there is, the better the phone gets, because you can look at one thing, then look at another thing on your own time. Where on television, the way we do it and the way we make our living, a lot of information is harder because we have to do things one at a time, right, serially on our schedule,
right,
as opposed to the way people use the phone. So, in my mind, getting all these things converging, the way people use their phones, the new information, and de-emphasizing the cone and so forth, but keeping the phone in mind is really the answer.
You made me think of our business, and some of our own data shows that when there is menacing weather, when people are at risk, the dwell time doubles. Mm-hmm. So it is clear, data shows that we get people's attention in a heightened sense. It makes a lot of sense. We were talking about post-pandemic. There does appear to be a little bit more of an appetite for this type of knowledge. Some of it, of course, is that a lot of people now have storms of reference. It's been brutally active the last several years. Does that make you more optimistic leading into a season that we think will be busy, that people are maybe a little more plugged in?
Well, I mean, I think we certainly hope that people are engaged, and certainly in some communities where there have been significant impacts. I mean, obviously people are very aware of that risk. But, you think of a place like Florida, you have thousands of people moving here all across hurricane-prone areas where you have new people coming in. But you could even look here in Southeast Florida. It's been over a generation since we took a direct major hurricane landfall here in Southeast Florida. So even people who've been here for a long time, may start to forget, may not realize what that risk is. And the risk profile changes. People move to different locations. Their own risk profile changes in terms of what they own, where they are. So it is a constant re-education effort, and we're in the midst of that now leading up to the 24 season.
More than a generation since a direct hit. We're going to talk more about that coming up. So an improved cone is coming. There's an argument to be made that we should eliminate the cone. There was a time when it didn't exist. Does this new cone do enough, or should we completely take it away?
Well, I think it's a starting point to start making changes, start improving, what we can depict on that graphic. There's always going to need to be a way to depict the track forecast of the storm. We don't want to go back to points on a map. I mean, that was the whole reason the cone was created to begin with, because the points are a line. We're overly deterministic.
People don't realize the cone's a bunch of circles.
Right, the cone's a bunch of circles built around the track, and as we think of going some 5 to 7 days, we have to think about how are we going to depict the 6 or 7 day track forecast where the uncertainty is even larger. So I think it's probably going to be a gradual evolution of how we try to modify what the cone shows, or maybe show a wider swath, potentially a wider potential range of outcomes. But that's probably where we're headed in the next few years.
Still ahead, how Fox weather correspondent Robert Ray is preparing for the upcoming season and why he confronts Mother Nature at its most fierce. And what the NHC is expecting this season, how record warm ocean temperatures in the main development region and a developing La Nina could make waves this hurricane season.
Time is running out for more than 1.5 million Floridians under orders to evacuate.
The power of the storm is being unleashed, and it's nowhere near over.
We will be here throughout the hurricane.
It has undergone rapid intensification.
We could see 30 or 40-foot swells and could see surge coming in here.
Now we'll have to see what the aftermath really looks like.
We are all over this country covering all these weather events.
The rain just coming down in droves.
Definitely a wild last 48 hours here.
Hey, welcome back to Miami. This is Hurricane HQ, the cone of confusion. We've talked a lot about forecasting tropical systems, but here at Fox Weather, we take you into the storm. We've got our whole team of Fox Weather correspondents that show you what's happening inside those elements. There's one man in particular, Fox Weather's Robert Ray, that is responsible for showing you the worst of it. He recounts his personal hurricane history.
Every year, for 6 months, American coastlines brace for the violent elements of hurricanes.
The foam and surge that's coming in, along with these incredible wind gusts.
Depending on the atmospheric conditions, a season can come and go with minimal impact to land, or leave its ferocious mark on communities and people's lives.
Right now, it's too hazardous out there. If one of these buildings goes down, or if you need trouble, if you go out on your back deck and fall in, we're not going to be able to get to you.
So the question begs, why do meteorologists, correspondents, photojournalists, and producers stand in the dangerous elements?
Havoc here with these gusts. Look at this.
The answer is simple, yet complex. First off, a witness to history. The ground truth shows and tells the impact of the hurricane.
Wow, okay. Stand by, guys. Just trying to look around to make sure there's nothing major, but this gust is huge. You see all the debris flying across the street?
Immersing oneself in the storm helps first responders and elected officials to see the elements in real time. This helps make critical decisions on dangers and aftermath.
So in entirety, we had more than 500 Coast Guard women and men responding for Hurricane Ian. More than 700 folks were saved or assisted by Coast Guard and partner agencies. Our air station out of Clearwater alone in the first 48 to 72 hours lifted more than 100 people to safety.
It's not safe by any means. The power of the storm
But of course, safety is paramount. I, for one, have covered nearly 50 hurricanes, and making sure we have a calculated plan for immediate shelter, the ability to keep communications alive, and have exit routes in place is constant.
Just before 5 a.m. here in Clearwater Beach, and I am about to walk into Coronado Street. We are preparing for live shots. This is the storm surge that we were fearing.
Hurricane coverage is a team sport, and knowing that at any point, anything can go wrong and there has to be a backup strategy will help keep the team safe.
Just tremendous amount of power and surge as the water, is rising. Excuse me.
Head on a swivel is my mantra. Never letting the guard down, and understanding that a hurricane's wrath will almost always win. We can document, but these storms show no mercy. And understanding the science and the impacts are just as important as having a survival plan on the ground.
There are so many areas completely underwater, homes where the water is up to the rooftop. I hope that people left those homes. I hope they got out like we did earlier today, because it's not going to be a great scene by any means.
For the world to witness the speed of the winds, the pelting rain, the sounds of Mother Nature's temper whipping through the buildings and streets, debris being thrashed through the air, and storm surge marching into communities, taking down anything or anyone in its path. All of this needs to be documented so help can make its way in after the skies part. Hurricane coverage is complex and dangerous, but without the documentation, we cannot learn and revise safety plans in order to save lives.
It's time to look ahead at this hurricane season. All the agencies, of which there are an increasing number that issue seasonal forecasts, you take the average, it's well north of 20. It's something like 24 named storms. This would be one of the most active seasons on record. So we look at why that's the case. Way above average, record sea surface temperatures in the main development region of the Atlantic. We've got this developing La Nina, which wasn't in place last year, and that was busy. Dr. Brennan, it feels like there's a lot of green lights. Are there any obvious inhibiting factors in the season ahead?
Well, you know, the seasonal activity is sort of a combination of what's happening on this very large scale, these basin-wide or global, type of phenomena like El Nino, La Nina, warm ocean temperatures in the Atlantic. But there's also the day-to-day and week-to-week variability about what goes on across the Atlantic basin. Saharan dust can sort of shut down areas in the main development region. You can have pockets of unfavorable conditions, strong wind shear. So all these factors are going to play a role in determining exactly how the season plays out. But certainly the large scale factors that you mentioned look relatively favorable for an active year. But, we don't know how fast La Nina is going to develop. Right. We don't know how long it's going to take that to reach its peak. Does it peak or it get really strong right as we hit the peak of hurricane season, or does it lag a little bit? And does the atmospheric response to that come along quickly, or does it lag too? So all those factors are going to play a role in how busy the season is. But as we always say, it only matters to most people if it's busy where you are, and we can't get it to that level of specificity yet. And we don't know exactly where the storms are going to form, where they're going to go, but everybody's got to be ready as we head into the season.
So Robbie, with all these green lights, understandably so, you got all these entities that are really stepping on the gas with some of these seasonal forecasts. How do you communicate what the NHC is expecting in a reasonable way when there is so much fanfare about this upcoming season?
I think the fact of the matter is we tell people prepare this year like you would any other year. It just takes that one storm to affect your community, and it's a bad season for you. Maybe we'll get lucky and most storms will stay out to the east and not hit the United States, but we just don't know at this time. I will say, regardless how slow or busy it is, the forecasters here are ready to go. I mean, we're going to be putting out forecasts for all these storms. Again, even if we have 20, 25 storms, and that doesn't include the storms we have in the Pacific as well.
Yeah.
So we're trained to do this. It gets busy at times, but we can handle it.
Bryan, we had talked a little bit about, and Dr. Phil Klotzbach from CSU had tweeted out early part of the season, we already have ocean heat content in the main development region of the Atlantic, which is where the big ones form most of the time into the heart of the season. What are your thoughts on what we've seen? The ocean heat content is more typical for what we would see in August in the heart of the season.
Well, the temperatures of the water across the Atlantic and plus the depth of the warm water is off the charts. There's no question about it. But what that might very well do is generate some storms like it did last year in June, way out in the Atlantic where we don't normally see them, and that kind of boosts up the numbers, right? So we would expect big numbers in terms of named storms because of that. But as Mike said, the weather pattern has everything to do with it, because in 2022, of course, we had next to no storms in July and none in August because of the weather pattern, not because of these macro conditions being hostile.
Right.
So it was really the transitional weather pattern, and then September 1st came, and then everything kicked in, and it was a record September. So that's why the numbers always have a lot of slop about them.
Right.
But the odds favor that the numbers will be high this year for sure.
When you're talking about weather patterns, though, there is no analog that exists for where we're at right now, moving into a hurricane season with the sea surface temperatures. Does that add an added challenge, not being able to go back in the record books and say this is what it looked like then and here's what we can expect now?
Yeah, I mean, I think it does, we are sort of in uncharted territory with some of these record ocean temperatures. So we saw last year, even in the face of a very strong El Nino, we did end up with a lot of storms, named storms. Right. We just didn't have a lot of them become hurricanes or major hurricanes. This year might be different. But yeah, you do try to look back at analogs, how have past seasons behaved, but maybe those not the best relationships to try to look at this time. We have a lot of other tools that go into seasonal forecasting, climate scale models, large scale models, in addition to statistical models and some of these other analog techniques.
So that leads to the question, and it's another age-old one, how much value do seasonal outlooks actually have?
Well, for the general public, they serve a purpose of letting people know, hey, hurricane season's coming. That's always a good thing. But in terms of preparation, as Robbie mentioned earlier, you have to get ready every year regardless. And I think that the danger in some of the adjectives and the words that have been used to describe what might happen this season is that we risk scaring people.
Right.
Or scaring people into inaction, or saying, oh, well, there's nothing I could do. The season's going to be so bad. Why should I even bother? Yeah, right. Yeah. So you don't know. But you don't want to cross that line. There's a fine line between making people aware or going across the line and trying to, or resulting in people panicking or sort of tuning out. So we don't want that. But, we've had busy hurricane seasons before. We've gotten through them. We're going to have them again at some point in the future, if not this year. But we just, as Robbie mentioned, we're going to be ready. The entire sort of hurricane universe of emergency managers, the media, the whole enterprise is ready for whatever the season will bring.
Yeah, it's a fine line you need to walk with the messaging.
Yep. Before Hurricane Andrew here in South Florida, people did not get excited when June 1st came along. It really was not a thought, because through the 70s and 80s, there had been a threat, but there really had not been any impacts. So the world is just different now, and as Mike said, the angst level does vary with people. Some people just coast through it, and others actually feel it in a big way here now, and that's been true now for the last 31 hurricane seasons after Hurricane Andrew.
Some of those feelings now renewed with Ian. The hurricane hunters chart a course for danger, confronting Mother Nature's ultimate storms and collecting life-saving information. Fox Weather's Brandy Campbell spotlights the tools shaping the future of hurricane forecasting. And in 2024, AI is everywhere. Is artificial intelligence the answer to better forecasting the track and intensity of hurricanes? The rise of the machines in understanding tropical cyclones, next.
I'm Bryan Norcross with a Hurricane HQ Minute. What the heck is the ITCZ? That stands for the Intertropical Convergence Zone, and it's a feature that's in the Atlantic every hurricane season, and it can hinder or help hurricane development. To understand what's going on, let's look at the wide view. Well, you know about the Bermuda High over the Atlantic. That's what brings summertime weather to the east coast of the U.S. Well, in the southern hemisphere, you also have a high pressure system, but it rotates the opposite direction. It's called the St. Helena High. And where those converge, what do you get? You get a general rotation in that area from that converging wind, and that converging wind produces a band of showers and thunderstorms. Well, that rotation with the showers and thunderstorms can actually get a spinning system going or enhance a spinning system where those winds collide. And sometimes there are so many areas spinning in the ITCZ that a tropical disturbance has trouble establishing spin of its own, which it needs to develop. It moves north in the summer and south in the winter because it is a monsoon kind of thing. Fox Weather has you covered this hurricane season. Find out how to stream us free at foxweather.tv.
Welcome back to Miami. The hurricane hunters, brave men and women who put their lives on the line to help save others by collecting critical data in, around, and above the storms. Here's Fox Weather's Brandy Campbell with a spotlight.
Before our Fox Weather team hits the ground running, reporting to you during these storms, the hurricane hunters will be on these aircrafts behind me, flying through them, gathering life-saving information. While some of you may have rode out a storm, could you imagine being mid-air inside of one?
From day to day and flight to flight, they could vary from the worst rickety old roller coaster you've ever been on to just like going down a slightly bumpy dirt road.
Christopher Wood pilots the P-3 aircrafts. This one, named Kermit, is one of 2 operated by NOAA. The Air Force Reserve has 10 C-130s as well. The Chief Aerial Reconnaissance at the National Hurricane Center could send multiple Hurricane Hunter aircrafts into storms to get data to better forecast storm intensity and track. NOAA engineer Nick Underwood gave us a tour of the P-3.
So, it's a flying research laboratory. We've got 3 radar systems on board, one in the nose, one in that M&M looking fairing on the bottom of the plane, and then one in the radome sticking off the back.
Flying at about 10,000 feet, a typical mission lasts 8 hours or more with about 15 crew members.
This station is where we'll launch instruments out of the aircraft. And so typically an operator like myself will sit here, and as we're flying through the storm, we're launching drop-sons, effectively a weather balloon in reverse. And so we'll drop these out of the aircraft. They have a parachute that deploys, and as they're floating down, they're collecting temperature, pressure, humidity, wind speed, and wind direction data.
Data is sent in real time to the National Hurricane Center into forecast models. We made our way through all the workspaces to the flight station where the pilots and engineer work. Going into his 8th season, I had to get Nick's take on what the ride is like.
There's a lot of vibration. You can get tossed around pretty good. There's wind and rain slapping against all of the windows. Once you get in the eye of the storm, it's calm again, so you get a little reprieve, but then you have to go right back out through the nastiness.
And the same goes for the crew of about 5 on the C-130s.
And our partners at the Air Force 53rd Weather Reconnaissance Squadron have their C-130s. And so they do a lot of the same mission that this aircraft does. We just have a little bit more research capability than they do with our extra radar systems and things like that.
Meanwhile, NOAA's G4 soars up to 45,000 feet, going above and around storms, releasing drop signs, collecting details of the atmosphere in and around storms. So what would hurricane season be like without these aircrafts? Pilot Wood says data from these flights increased forecasts by 10 to 20%.
When you're making the decisions whether you're going to evacuate your home, if you need to go and buy supplies and stock up, 10 to 20% is a really large margin. It's really important for you to make those decisions. Without these aircraft, we would be much more uncertain on what the storms are going to do.
And they continue to work on new ways to get better data.
We have new drop-sons that are able to stay aloft a little bit longer, collect a little bit more data.
We are actively working to test and develop a variety of different drones that will be able to collect information in some of the boundary layers that are unsafe for manned aircraft to actually fly.
Now, while we're expecting a very active hurricane season, the hurricane hunters, they're telling me it's going to be business as usual for them, and they are ready for what's to come.
Let's talk more about why we're sitting in Miami, Florida. And Bryan, it sounds like this wasn't always a certainty. Immediately following Andrew, you spoke with a panel about the decision of should the National Hurricane Center's headquarters be in the heart of the hurricane zone.
Yeah, so I got a call from some folks in Washington. It was an eminent panel of meteorologists associated with the National Weather Service. And they said, can you come to a hotel in downtown Miami and have an interview? We're going to talk about the Hurricane Center. I said, sure. Well, I get there, and the question was, what would you think if the new Hurricane Center, because the old one clearly was not going to work, and so a new one was needed, what would you think if it were in Memphis? And I said, I think that's a terrible idea because the hurricane people in the world are in Miami. It's just like you wouldn't put the tornado center in any place but Oklahoma, right? You wouldn't put that in Miami, right? Because tornadoes in Oklahoma, and that's where people that know about tornadoes and think about tornadoes, that's where they are.
Storm Prediction Center in Bangor, Maine.
Right. And this is where people that know about hurricanes, think about hurricanes, are there here in South Florida. So, is that your thought?
Yeah, I mean, I think you can go all the way back to the history of why the Hurricane Center ended up on Miami in the first place. Yeah. You go back to the early history of the Weather Bureau, the early 20th century. The hurricane forecast started out in Washington. There were some events that didn't go very well. It was thought, well, it should be done somewhere where they actually have hurricanes more frequently. And then it's moved around, and it was divided up amongst multiple offices. But then, you know, with the advent of the National Hurricane Research Project that started here in South Florida in the 1950s, you had aircraft flying out of here, you had the research community here. So the decision was eventually made to consolidate all of that back here in Miami by the 1980s. The center of the hurricane universe, at least in the United States, is here in South Florida.
But Robbie, that's why this facility looks like a literal fortress. This thing can stand up to a big storm.
Yeah, and as Bryan was talking about, moving the Hurricane Center from where it was back during Andrew to here, we're now out of a storm surge zone, so we don't have to worry about that. And the walls of this place themselves, there's almost 2 layers of walls that are rated to Category 5 intensity. So heaven forbid, should we have a Category 5 right here, those of us that will be sheltering in place, you know, would be safe, and we can continue to get our forecasts out.
This place, the Magic City, has an especially rich hurricane history, particularly through the early part of the past century. 7 times in the first 7 decades of the 20th century, a storm passed directly over downtown, and that doesn't even include later on storms like Andrew, like we've discussed. Could you imagine a run like that in modern times? Relatively speaking, it's been quieter.
Yeah, for certainly here in South Florida, but we've had other locations that have experienced frequent hurricane landfalls, multiple hurricane landfalls in the same year. You look at Louisiana back in 2020, for example. But yeah, you think about early 20th century, Miami was a very tiny fraction in terms of the people and the stuff. And then, you know, we have like more than 6 million people now that live between Miami-Dade County and up to Palm Beach, a tremendous concentration of people in a small area that have a lot of property, a lot of value. So you take one of those hurricanes and you put it into modern times, it would be potentially catastrophic from both a loss of human life and an economic cost.
We're not implying causation.
Sure.
But since you've had a management role, it has been especially active, storm after storm after storm. Does it get easier running this place with the knowledge that you've gained?
Well, I think, you've been through a lot, and you take lessons from every storm, and you sort of start to learn how to handle things better, how to forecast better, how to communicate better. Go back to 2017, we've had 20 hurricane landfalls in the United States since 2017, a number of Category 4s and Category 5s as well. Again, we have a really great team here. It's got a lot of experience, many, many years, many forecasts. We're forecasting every hurricane. That's what we want people to remember. We're not just forecasting the hurricanes when they get close to the U.S. We're forecasting everything across the Atlantic, the Pacific. We get hundreds and hundreds of forecasts a year, so a lot of experience.
Bryan, the big one was 1926, the Great Miami Hurricane of 1926. How this place has changed. You've been down in South Florida for decades. How could this area now stand up to a storm like that?
Well, it would be completely different than it was then, because so much of the area was just concentrated near the coast, and now it goes 15 or 20 miles inland. But that storm was so exceptional because of its incredible size. The eye was so big that it passed over downtown Miami, but it took out the city to the north of here, Hollywood and Dania. It put 6 feet of water in downtown Fort Lauderdale, storm surge into West Palm Beach, 75 miles from here. So you had this tremendous amount of storm surge impact. The ocean came completely over Miami Beach, and there were only 100,000 people in Miami-Dade County at the time, about 125,000 in all of South Florida. And
what you just described,
now you got 6 million.
Right.
You have so many people and so much wealth and so many facilities and so much infrastructure here that there's no way to avoid really a monumental disaster in an epic storm like the 1926 hurricane.
The National Hurricane Center has more data than ever to be able to prepare a forecast. We've got the new GOES series, the Hurricane Hunters launching drones out of the aircraft now, sail drones. That's been a really cool addition, and some of that footage has been incredible to see. I have to think that's mostly good. There's got to be a little bit of analysis paralysis when you're making a high-stress forecast, but how do you put together all of that information coming in a short period of time to issue a new forecast each cycle?
Yeah, the forecast cycle itself is really about 2 hours long. So there's sort of an hour to kind of look at the data that's coming in. A lot of it comes in right at the beginning of that time. Your satellite classifications or intensity estimates. We try to time the aircraft reconnaissance so they're in there at the beginning of that forecast cycle. But you're right, the data just keeps coming. So sometimes when you're sitting there making a forecast, you have to go back and adjust things, especially if things are changing rapidly, if you have a storm rapidly intensifying. But the aircraft data continues to be, sort of the most direct measurements we get, because again, we can send the aircraft right into the storm. They can measure directly the pressure, the wind, the size, tell us where the center is located. But I think the biggest thing that's changed in recent years is, we've been flying aircraft into hurricanes for 70 or 80 years. For many of those years, it was just for the benefit of the human forecaster to use in that analysis process. But now all that data goes into the numerical models. And that's what's really changed in the last 5 or 10 years. All the flight level data, the dropsondes, the tail Doppler radar data, all of that is getting into the models and improving their analysis and their forecast. And that's one reason why we made a big step forward in forecasting intensity in the last 5 to 10 years.
Robbie, 2024, you can't throw a rock and not hit some terrifying article about AI or a clip on social media. Could that be a solution moving forward as the National Hurricane Center looked into some AI capabilities for forecasting?
Yeah, I don't think AI is going to replace the forecasters back here, but I think it can help us. We've already seen cases. One of the models we use for intensity in track, for example, it uses past storms and how it's behaved and retrained itself to help us get better forecasts in the future. We're also using AI starting this year to help us translate our products into other languages. So whereas most of the products we've issued have been in English, it'll now be available in Spanish as well. And we hope that we can expand that to other languages, because we've got customers across the Caribbean that also speak French, Dutch, Creole, Haitian. So I think just getting that message out in other languages is going to be helpful, and AI is helping us do that.
This guy's human AI in all the best ways, and I'm lucky to work shoulder to shoulder with you. We had this conversation back during Lee. These AI models, which don't do numerical weather prediction, it's more pattern recognition, they did quite well with Lee. What do you think in the short term here?
They did. I think the AI models are going to be used either in combination with themselves in some way. Like there are these different AI models. The average of those models is actually an excellent forecast, an excellent consensus forecast already, and they're all brand new.
So right now we're doing some preliminary evaluations of some of the AI guidance we've seen. It seems to be better suited for track rather than intensity so far, but again, because it's being trained on this sort of large scale reanalysis data, which you would think it would do well for track. But the other thing you mentioned is that the AI models are changing almost on a week-to-week basis. So it's going to be this constant evolution, very different than traditional numerical weather prediction, where models have only changed on the time scale of every couple of years. So you got time to understand how they behaved. So one of the big challenges for the human forecaster is to understand why the AI guidance is doing what it's doing, so you can understand it, scrutinize it, and use it in the best way possible.
And mind to be hallucinating, which is the ongoing
Robbie mentioned
challenge.
it a little bit, though. But you just said this is, it feels literally week to week. The growth has been exponential. Yeah. Can you ever imagine a future where AI would replace the human forecaster?
I don't think entirely. I mean, I think you could have a very good first guess that a human forecaster would be involved in, sort of over the loop, ensuring consistency, and then also especially on the messaging side and deciding, when do you issue a warning? How do you convey the hazard information to people? Because there's still that need to communicate. That's where we are now. We just talked earlier about how challenging the communication part is. And maybe there will be solutions, as Robbie talked about, in terms of translation. How do you convey information to people that they can consume it on their phone in the language that they're most comfortable with? I think there's promise in that front as well.
And I would add too, since AI is using a training set of data to come up with its solutions, some of these high impact events that we see, there is no data there to say that's going to happen again. So I think it's hard to use AI for some of these events that we don't see all the time.
The farther away from normal you get. Still ahead, should there be a Category 6? Social media sure seems to think so. We've heard that chorus. We're not so sure. We've got a lightning round with the NHC. And Miami has a reputation for being hurricane central, or at least it once did. So why exactly is the NHC located here, of all places, in the heart of the hurricane zone? We'll have the answer to that question, along with an inside look at the command center, next. South Florida is synonymous with hurricane, and that, Bryan, is thanks in part to the storied history of the city of Miami with hurricanes. You're part of that history. Thankfully, though, relatively speaking, it's been fairly quiet recently here.
Relative to the past, people here don't appreciate how many hurricanes used to hit South Florida up to the 60s. And since then, we've had hurricane impacts, but not those kind of regular
direct hits
ones
over downtown
that we used to have. Which brings up the question, is with all those hurricanes in the history book, why is the National Hurricane Center located here? Let me take you inside and let's talk about that. I'm here with National Hurricane Center Director Dr. Mike Brennan on the operations floor deep inside the building. All right, talk about, well, where are we here, and let's take a little tour.
Yeah, this is the media desk. So when we have hurricane affecting the United States, you'll see myself or Jamie or one of our other staff doing briefings and talkbacks with you on Fox Weather, other national media outlets, local TV stations in the affected areas. So that's how we help get the message out.
All right, and then it all goes around the forecast, right?
Yes.
It's all part of the forecast. So this is where the action is over here?
Yeah, and that's why the media desk is right here. So we can hear what the hurricane specialist is doing and thinking. They're looking at all the data. You can see the satellite imagery, the models. This is where they put all the products and all the whole advisory package together. So this is really sort of the hub of the action out here.
Of course, the aircraft data is critical to making the best forecast.
Yeah, the aircraft give us the most important direct measurements we can get about where the storm's located, how strong it is, how big it is, and that plays a direct role into starting our forecast process.
All right, let's take a look at where that data comes in. All right, Mike, what goes on in here?
Yeah, this is the Carca room. So this is an Air Force Reserve outpost where they coordinate all the aircraft reconnaissance requests that come from the hurricane specialist every day. This is where Kyle is one of the Carca staff. He's quality controlling all the data that comes in off the aircraft. He's communicating directly with the flight crews on both the Air Force Reserve and NO aircraft and getting that information directly to the forecasters here at the Hurricane Center, as well as sending it out to the world. And then that plays into the messaging, and we're walking here into the FEMA Hurricane Liaison Team room. They are our conduit to the emergency management community at the federal, state, and local level during a storm. So here's where we do briefings for the federal government, for states, and they bring in hurricane program managers from around the country, and we help answer questions, talk to them about what's going on in terms of evacuations and other decision making.
So that's the National Hurricane Center, but here's a question, and we're going to answer this in just a minute. Why is the National Hurricane Center in Miami if it's going to be threatened by hurricanes? We'll talk about that.
All right, no Dwayne Wade, no Pat Riley, but it is time to bring a little Miami heat to this conversation, turning things up a notch. We get all kinds of questions all the time at Fox Weather, particularly on social media. We know you guys do too at the National Hurricane Center. So we need to get some answers. We're going to do it rapid fire in the lightning round. Dr. Brennan, we'll start with you. This was the story of last year. Category 6. Yeah. Any value at all?
Not really. Category 5, the Saffir-Simpson wind scale is, wind impacts. It's already catastrophic. I think Category 6 would only sort of increase the focus on that, which we've been trying to de-emphasize since it's really the water hazards we're most concerned about.
Robbie, thumbs up, thumbs down? Bryan?
Yeah, no, we don't need that.
I agree. Folks in Florida, it gets to a 3. They're taking it especially serious. We know that the National Hurricane Center doesn't make the list of names. Does the strength of the name matter? Is there any different response to a weaker name?
I don't think so. I've never thought of it that way.
Do you have a least favorite?
No.
No?
No, I don't think so.
They're all our family.
Having to say it 100,000 times, mine would be Cristobal and Isaías.
Isaías.
Yeah.
Yes. We had to actually practice Isaías over and over again in the bathroom. Isaías. Yes, that was the one.
And you're a pro now.
Now I don't even think about it.
I met a 5-year-old on the Hurricane Awareness Tour last week, pronounced it perfectly.
Yeah.
So it can be done.
It can be done.
Now we know. Most surprising thing you've ever seen in tropical meteorology?
Hurricane Michael's rapid intensification up to landfall. That will always stick with me.
I'll add Otis last year too in the Pacific.
Yeah, Otis for sure. But honestly, it was Hurricane Andrew, and seeing those 2x4s through the palm trees and the plywood splitting a palm tree and imagining what was happening in the storm that caused that to happen.
Yeah, those were incredible scenes. For me, it's Otis. That felt otherworldly that was even possible. As we look back at social media, it helps or it hurts? Are you spending most of your time putting out fires you didn't start?
It's both. I think we try to broadcast and not so much respond. So I think that's why we try to use it to our advantage.
Yeah, and caution people not to get caught up in the noise.
Okay.
Yeah, I think on balance, it's good, but it has, like so many other things, lots of positives and lots of negatives, and it's a close call.
We know there are a lot of interesting areas, but the most troubling spot in the basin to forecast a tropical system.
Oh, wow. I have to think about that one. I'll let you go first.
Well, I mean, the Gulf is tough because anything in the Gulf is probably going to hit land somewhere.
Yeah.
And because of the waters there, they have a tendency to rapidly intensify. So probably the Gulf, I would say.
Yeah. I would say also by the islands. When a storm is going to be close to the islands or go between the islands. I mean, Dorian was an example. That was one of the worst hurricane forecasts that blew my mind, where it was aimed at the Dominican Republic and it hit the Virgin Islands because it interacted with San Lucia, I guess, right?
For me, if you and I have had the conversation about Pico Duarte, it's going to be a challenge. Both sides of Hispaniola, that can be something. Right. If not meteorology, then what?
Oh, wow. What would I have done? Big history buff, maybe a historian, or maybe a broadcaster. I don't know. Mm-hmm.
Yeah, I would say communications for me is I mean, I love it. I actually went back to school.
Yeah.
Well, I'm not much of a talker, but I'll communicate when I need to.
Bryan?
Well, I was in broadcasting, and actually I was an engineer. I started in broadcasting, really, television as an engineer. So I was always kind of a technical guy. I'd probably be a computer guy.
Best hurricanes, Carolina or the U?
No, Carolina.
Carolina.
Oh, big Carolina fan.
Yeah,
both of you guys?
These Carolina, NC State people. No, I'll go with the U, even though I'm an FSU guy, but I'll go with the U. I taught it to you.
I thought it would be a sin to throw out something that wasn't the U.
Yeah.
We'll keep it there, and I think I might have my answer already. Best college meteorology program in this country?
Oh, NC State, of course.
2 NC Staters? Yeah. The Wolfpack?
Yeah, and the Knolls.
The Knolls?
Yeah.
Shout out Linden State. Yeah. The Hornets. Yeah. We're a small breed, small but mighty. And an open question for everybody. Favorite weather news platform, and why is it Fox Weather?
Yeah, so, you
got the poll.
What can we say?
Hey, the director of the National Hurricane Center, Dr. Michael Brennan, warning coordination meteorologist, Robbie Berg. We thank you both for your time. It's been a wonderful conversation. Thanks for being with us on Fox Weather.
Great to be here. Thanks.
Yeah, thank you, guys. That'll do it for us here from the National Hurricane Center.
We got a long season ahead. You can keep the conversation going with us here on Fox Weather using the hashtag HurricaneHQ.
Because Fox Weather is your Hurricane HQ.
Thanks for watching.